I'm your host, Kathryn Taylor, and this is where we tell the stories behind the stories, and they are often so interesting, almost as much as the books themselves. My guest today lives in Ottawa, Canada, but he is originally from the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. He has written an incredible series of books about Sgt Winston Windflower, and you may have heard of them, and if you haven't, you're going to learn all about his writing adventures today. Join me in welcoming Mike Martin to the show. Hi, Mike, how are you?
Hi, Catherine. Nice to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You know, I ran across your books. It was quite some time ago, and I was like, this is amazing. This is a wonderful series. And I was so surprised to find that it was set in Grand Bank, Newfoundland and Labrador. So I thought your roots would lead back here, which is what led me to you. And tell me, how did this all get started for you?
Well, the Sergeant Windflower mystery series is set in the Burin Peninsula of Newfoundland, so mostly in Grand Bank, Marystown, Burin, um, and how it got to be set up there was I'm originally from St. John's. I was born in St. John's a long time ago. I lived in Ottawa a long time, um, but still have connections to Newfoundland. It's still home. It'll always be home, and so, how I got to write the story based in Grand Bank is that my partner, who I didn't know at the time when we first met, her family is originally from Grand Bank, and she bought her grandfather's house and restored it. And so that made a great place for us to go visit because we wanted to go visit Newfoundland. And so we've been going down to Newfoundland for the last 15, 16 years, spending the month of August in the Grand Bank area, sometime on the West Coast, mostly in the Grand Bank area. And so I'm trying to figure out how do I write a fiction story, a mystery story. And Grand Bank is a perfect setting. If you know anything about Grand Bank, it's got a history of shipbuilding and the Grand Bank fishery and the Grand Bank schooners, and of course, smuggling was a big industry at one time in Grand Bank.
And you know, Mike, I've got neighbors now who are from down in that area. And as I was reading the book and you're describing the fog creeping in over the streets and the lack of sunshine at times, they tell me that's still the case down there quite often. Such a great setting for mysteries. So and I should mention that you have been writing really all your life. I think even back when you were a boy, you had a keen interest in being a writer. You published short stories, you've been published in many magazines, and you've written articles. So this wasn't new to you, but fiction was newer, and that was around 2012, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I've always been a writer. I think people are born writers, and but I discovered my love of reading first. I had three older sisters, two of which were teachers, and they would take me to the library every week. They didn't really want to take me, but they would take me to the library, and that's where I discovered the joy of reading. And I thought, even as a little kid, I thought maybe I could write a story one day. But of course, the that's a long path to get to being a published writer, and it wasn't really a career option for me. I mean, I grew up in a working class family in Newfoundland in St. John's, and being a writer or an artist wasn't really a possibility. And so I went to work. What I found was I found myself in jobs that required writing of some sort. And so I practiced my skill of writing. I would write poetry, little stories at Christmas time, but nothing really published until later in life when I think it's about having time and space to be able to write. And once that happened, then I decided I'm going to write a fiction book. And that's another story.
That's another story. It's interesting. Your path and my path are somewhat similar because I felt as a young child that I wanted to write and was always quite captivated. And again, went to university, had to figure out now how am I going to make a living. And to me at that time that seemed like a very big leap to become a writer. So I worked in PR and I wrote speeches and press releases, but all the time honing your skills with the pen or computer as it is more now until you get to the point that I've got to get this done. I've got to get it
Yeah.
on paper. And so I really feel your story. I totally engage with it. So around about that time, you said you were going to do it. Were you in Newfoundland when inspiration hit?
Well, the Sgt Windflower mystery series originated in Newfoundland. It's a Newfoundland story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when when I finally got up the courage to say I'm going to write a book, then I had to figure out how to do it and what kind of book would it be, where would it be set. And the easy thing for me was to set it in Newfoundland. I always wanted to have a story that I could set in Newfoundland. Because if you read any of the books, there's a little bit of history, a little bit of the background of Newfoundland and Labrador in each one of the books. And I love that, to be able to weave that into the mystery story as it's unfolding. So I had the rough setting, but I didn't know, where exactly to set it. And I describe it as one night in the fog in Grand Bank, Sergeant Windflower kind of came out of the fog and started telling me his story. And I just started writing it down. And over a period of time, he came, other characters came, and my job was simply to listen, sort them out a little bit, and write down the stories. And so that's how I describe how the Sergeant Windflower mystery series started.
I've got quite an image from that. That's amazing. The fact that you say he came out of the fog and he started telling you the story. It's not that uncommon that characters arrive in our lives and we relate to them, we hear of them. He's a very relatable character. He is somebody who's very human. This is my take on him, but also he struggles with his life at times, and as our lives all do, but it weaves out into this beautiful story, including the most unusual things. I'll tell you that RCMP division there in Grand Bank and Marystown, that's a pretty busy place. How do you keep coming up with the ideas, Mike?
Well, I mean, it's a murder mystery, so that means somebody has to die, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you realize when you set a series in a small town or a small community is you can't kill too many local people because you won't have anybody left. And so usually the people are outsiders or they're visitors or they've come from away, which are always good to kill. Um, and uh, and so the that's how you find the victims in the story. And there's always bad guys. Even in a small community, there's some people who just aren't nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first story came actually came out of a story that there was a guy who had a heart attack on a walk above Grand Bank called the Cape. There's a big, rocky promenade that overlooks Grand Bank, and somebody had a heart attack up there and died. And the inspiration for the story for the walk around the Cape, the first book in the series, was this guy who died up on the hill, a real person who died, but maybe he didn't have a heart attack. Maybe something else happened, and that's how the story opens.
Mm. There's always a good story in everything. And you said you do draw a lot of ideas from things that can happen in a community and then pull it a bit further. And I mean, one obvious one I think of course, would be the drugs, and I've seen that come up in your setting. When you're writing about an RCMP division like that, do you ever go to the source? Have you ever run your material by the RCMP, or do you write this based upon what you think it would be like?
Well, I have a couple of friends who I bounce ideas around. I've shared the books with a couple of our CMP officers. I don't ask them for advice. I'm not that brave. But I have heard back from them that it feels true. It feels right that you know in the RCMP, there's lots of great people, but there's also problems, and some of those have come out in recent years. And and so there's a dichotomy of good people working in a system that isn't so great, and the dynamics. I think I understand that on the police procedures. Google will tell you almost anything now. How to kill people, how to poison people, all kinds of things that we shouldn't know. But the the other thing is, I try to keep the police procedural stuff simple,
Mm-hmm.
because if I can't explain it so I can understand it, how will anybody else understand it? And I can guarantee you this: if I make a mistake, somebody will point it out.
Of course. Yeah, and I think that's one of the nice things about the book. You don't get into that minutiae and drag us down. The story keeps moving, and then you turn around and there's another thing that's happened, or, that sort of thing. And you have your share of good guys and bad guys, and you've dealt with some interesting issues within the RCMP in there as well. So I have to say, you really keep one turning the pages to see what's coming next. I like the fact, too, that you brought in a lot of spirituality and grounding through your main character, through Winston Windflower, because he's smudging and he's very true to his roots as an Indigenous person. Was there any particular reason why you went in that direction?
Well, as I described earlier, Windflower came out of the fog, and he came just as he was.
Mm-hmm.
So people ask me, why did you make him indigenous? I didn't make him indigenous. He came that way. The same way he came from Pink Lake, Alberta, the same way that he's an RCP officer, all that stuff, he sort of came with that. And the story really only begins when he gets in Grand Bank. There's very little about his background because I don't really know his background. I don't know what his story is. And
Mm-hmm.
on the spirituality piece, I try to be very careful about that. I want to respect other people's religion or spiritual practices. And so the practices he uses are very simple, commonplace ones that many people would use, not just Indigenous people.
True enough.
The idea of smudging is quite common now. Lots of people smudge, and whether you do it with candles or whether you do it with incense or whether you do it with what he calls his sacred herbs or medicines, people understand that principle, and it's not much of a stretch to go there. The other piece is he's a dream weaver, which isn't necessarily indigenous. It's more in the dream world. And he learned that from his auntie and his uncle, who are master dream weavers. And the first time I did it, I thought this is a bit weird, but Windflower kept saying this is the way it is, and so I kept writing it down. So that's an element now that allows a Windflower to explore more of his inner self and more of the things that are going on inside of him. And actually, I find it more interesting than sometimes the story itself.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see the dreams. And as I've been reading some of the books, and I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been having some very, very vivid dreams myself, and I'm thinking a lot about how this can, what is this world that impacts us? But he gets so many messages. We're sharing some of the book covers there now, and there are 16 books, I want to say, in all, and there's a new one coming out in May. And I definitely will touch upon that. I just read the Fire, Fog, and Water book myself. And Friends Forever, I think is the title of your next one. Um, and we'll come back to you. One question before we go down that path. You mentioned how Windflower showed up and the story was told. Were you, and the term is pantster, people who kind of write by the seat of their pants. That sounds to me like how you started. Is that how you've continued the series? Can you talk a little bit about that writing process?
Absolutely. So there's basically the plotters and the pantsers,
Mm.
and I have a friend, a writer, who before she writes the book, before she sits down and types one word, she has to plot the whole book out in little white squares, and she posts them on walls in her house. And only when she finishes all the little squares can she sit down to write. Um, for me, I think that is so much work I could never do it. And so I'm a pure pantser. I write straight from what I call the creative flow, which is the story's already there. It's somewhere in that creative flow and that creative energy, and my job is to tap into it. And so when I'm centered myself, and when I'm in a good space and I have time, and I have a good environment, I try and tap into that space. That's when the characters can speak to me, and that's when I start writing. And so I've always been that way. And quite honestly, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot more fun because I don't know how the story will end.
Hmm.
When I start the story, something happens. I don't know who did it. I don't know what's going to happen next. And so it's almost a frantic pace to keep writing so I can find out what happened. but it's a lot of fun.
I like it. And I'm very much that way. But when I was writing, my book was, I had to write the screenplay for it, and then we were looking at a series. And I was working with a writer out of Hollywood. And the first thing we did, we sat down with kind of this board with all these yellow stickies, and we were mapping out each show of the first season. And it was so different. He went at it in such a structured way, exactly what you were talking about with your friend. And I had to work within that structure as well, and what I was responsible to take care of. And it's different. I'm kind of somewhere in between right now. I found that it was very productive. I felt some guidance, but I was in an area of writing that I wasn't as familiar with. But I like your way. I really do believe that characters do speak to writers and guide them along. So, does it make it hard for you to get an ending to a book? Do you ever struggle with that?
I always struggle with the ending. When I wrote the first book, The Walk Around the Cape, the people say there are three hard parts about writing a book: the beginning, the middle, and the end. I didn't have. I finally had a beginning. I finally had a middle. I had no idea how this story ended, because it didn't feel like it was finished. And I had no intention of writing a series. My idea was I was going to write a book, and that would be done, and I could have that, cross it off my bucket list, and I'd be done. And so I couldn't figure out how to finish it. And that's when my partner, who's the real mystery fan in the family, she said, "Why don't you make it a series?" And I said, "Oh, that's brilliant." And so basically, the story doesn't, it's not a continuous story that, you pick up one story, one book, and then the next story picks it up right after. But they are in kind of sequence. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to stop at a certain point and say, I'm writing the end of this, like a TV show. I'm writing the
Mm-hmm.
end of the TV show. There'll be another season. And you leave a cliffhanger at the end, or at least for me, I know where the next book's going to start. I know that these things are, because I could keep writing,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody really likes 800-page books anymore, unless
Not
you're
so much.
George Martin, or maybe Elizabeth George, or some people who could do that. But I think it's hard to market and sell those. So the idea of having a series is how I got out of the ending. And and some people say that, or there's a saying somewhere that the story only dies when the writer dies, right? That
Mm.
the story continues, and so as long as I have energy and have ideas, I'm going to keep writing.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm sure there are a lot of people that are pleased to hear you say that. There was when you say that, I used to read I read every Robert Parker book that there was because I do like mystery, and I was so disappointed when he died, and he had a couple of different sidelines in his series, and he went into Sonny Randall and so on. And when you get hooked on a series, it's truly amazing. Do you see any end to it, at all at this point?
Well, like I said, I think that as long as I have energy, I think writing is a form of, like, writing takes energy to do, right? And you know
Mm-hmm.
that as a writer yourself. And so, do you have energy to do that? And and also, how is your mental faculty? I mean, really, like, we we do age, and we do
Keeping
lose
track.
little pieces, right?
Mm.
Little pieces of our hair, little toenails. We lose different things along the way, and our mental capacity is like that as well. And so for me, the test is always like a hockey player, I guess, who, when do you retire if you can still play, right? I have a group of beta readers who review the books. If they ever came back to me and say, "This is not up to snuff. This is not a Winston Windflower mystery. It's not good enough," I would know then it's time to hang up my skates and my computer, and I could stop. But I think as long as I have energy, the other thing is, as soon as people read the book, they ask, "When's the next book coming?" Right?
Oh yeah.
And so there's a little bit of pressure in terms of when's the next book. But what I figured out is I start writing the next book before the other book is out. So then
Mm.
I just finished book 17. Not to give away a big secret, I just finished it, or a first draft of it, and so I know there'll be a book 17. Whether it'll be a book 18, You have to
I
ask
will
me
tell.
next year.
Well, I looked back through all your books starting in 2012, and it seems like it was a book a year, but you picked up the pace there, and I think 2023 you popped out, or 2022 with two books. And so are you writing more now, or what's the change?
Well, I wrote two books in COVID because
Mm,
why not, right?
right.
What else are you gonna do, right? I also wrote a book of poetry. I did all kinds of stuff in in COVID, um, and and also when you have ideas, you have to put them somewhere, right? And
Mm,
so I had the idea for an extra book, and so last year I think there were two books last year. So two books in COVID and two books in last year, simply because the ideas are there, and when the idea is there, because the books are roughly set in today's time, maybe a year. It's a year ago. If you think about, if you read Friends of Forever, it happened last year, and
mm,
so the next book will be this year, and so the it keeps it timely, and it doesn't get stale. You don't want to be writing about COVID if COVID is over, right? Not that I would
exactly.
write about COVID anyway, but my pattern now, my basic pattern is I write a book a year. I spend 3 4 months writing the first main draft, and then another 3 months for editing and production and everything else that happens with that, and then basically it gives 6 months for promotion. And that's the business we're in, which is you write and then you promote. And so 3 months to write, 3 months for editing, 6 months for production, for marketing, mostly social media.
And it gives you a bit of time to sit with the story as well, because when you're so close to a story, there's times where you just need to step back and look at your material with fresh eyes. At least I do find that. So you said mostly social media. Where do people find you these days? Are you on all social medias, or do you have a favorite?
Well, I mean, I'm on Facebook is the
Mm-hmm.
main vehicle, and most writers use Facebook as their medium. Lots of younger writers use Instagram. I'm not that young. Plus, I don't really want to have to develop another platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can find Sergeant Windflower Mysteries if you search that on Facebook. And I regularly update that. I'm also still on X, but I wonder why, like most people. And and so that's really the main forum. I do post irregularly on my website, and people can find that at sergeantwindflowermysteries.com. Um, and it tends to happen when there's a new book come out. I'll do a couple of articles, blog posts around the new book, around reviews what people are saying about the book. Um, and mostly the that's the pattern of it. That social media is a great vehicle. Facebook is a great vehicle for mystery writers in particular, because mystery writers, the demographic tends to be older and female, and that is a preferred vehicle that people like for social media. So because the grandmothers are on there looking for the pictures of their grandkids, they also will look at your books, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the marketing, and it actually works. And Facebook is great for one thing, which is you can target demographics. And so if you know what your demographics are, and mine are, women over 50 usually. That doesn't mean anybody can read it, but that's people who buy the books. And you can target your marketing to that.
You know, Mike, that's so interesting that you would say that, because your books, when you think they're written by a man, the main character is a man, and yet you have such a sentimental side in there, and it comes out in his relationships and so on. And I can see why that would be your demographic. I could also see a lot of people asking you if you're ever going to publish a recipe book, because there's a great deal of information on our way of eating here in Newfoundland and Labrador, traditional meals. You must get that question.
Absolutely, and it's certainly there, and as a project somewhere along the way. The food came in because when I started thinking about a mystery series, One mystery series that I really liked was is written by Donna Leon, and she's still writing, and it's set in Venice, and it always features these fabulous Italian meals. And I thought, man, I love to eat. I'd love to read a book that has food in it. And then the other thing that happens, of course, is in the course of an RCMP officer's or police officer's work, there's always downtime, right? There's always
Mm-hmm.
you're always waiting for the next piece to happen. And so what do you do when you're waiting?
You
Go
eat.
have lunch, right?
Oh
And
my
to
goodness,
get
Mike.
coffee.
You're
And
making
and
me.
and so and so it what it does though is it also when you're writing a book, particularly this kind of book, there's a lot of dialogue. And after a while, it gets really tiring to write the dialogue all over and over. And so you want to break in that. And I figured out that you could use food as a break, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Windflower likes to cook, like I like to cook. He likes to eat more, which I'm probably more my range too. And so it's been a lot of fun, and lots of people have asked for recipes. The idea of a recipe book, and maybe one of these days. We'll see.
Well, it's been lovely chatting with you, Mike, and I really want to thank you for your time, and I want to wish you all the best with the new book coming out, Friends Are Forever. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure our viewers have really enjoyed this conversation we've had. But don't go away. We'll be right back. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Let's Get Writing with my guest, Mike Martin. And if the RCMP or that sort of topic is your thing, you might like to check out an interview on my YouTube channel that I did with Paul Palengo in the book 22 Murders, which covers the massacre in Nova Scotia. Now, Paul is going to be back on the show soon, and he's going to be talking to me about his second book, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, The Truth About the RCMP and the Nova Scotia Massacres. Much heavier topic, but all those shows and more are on my YouTube channel. And I would love it if you would subscribe and have a look at the content. It really means a lot. It helps me keep going and producing shows, and it's a true pleasure to bring you these authors and these stories. Thank you so much.